Hello and welcome to this week's Parents Chat. The topics we are going to discuss today is establishing routines and structured virtual school days. My name is Gerard Mijon and I'm with the Clarity Child Guidance Center, and we look forward to an engaging conversation with our speaker, Dr. Megan Lawson. For those who are not familiar with our organization, Clarity Child Guidance Center is a nonprofit treatment center solely dedicated to helping children 3 to 17 with their mental health. Clarity is located in the San Antonio Medical Center and provide inpatient and outpatient services to several thousands of children every year. You can read more about the center at claritycgc.org and also there about children's mental health and our prevention and education program. Before we start, I want to provide a few technical details. The webinar will end at 11:30, including a 10-minute Q&A at the end. This talk is recorded, but none of the names of the attendees will show in the recording to protect your privacy. That's also why we're not taking live questions. However, if you have questions for Dr. Lawson, we invite you to post them in the chat space at any time during the talk. Of course, this event is purely educational and is by no means an attempt to provide counseling online. Dr. Lawson is a psychologist who provides outpatient individual therapy and family therapy at Clarity since 2018. She helps patients with a variety of concerns and runs a trauma group for teen girls. She is also the mom of 2 younger children who are 3 and 6 years old. She is joining us today from her office on our campus. Dr. Lawson, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Great to have you. Now, we'll start with a kind of broad question concerning routine and structure. What is the value of routine and structure for a child? Is there any data that shows how routine or lack thereof can impact a child?
Yeah, a great question. So I'll start with kind of the first part. So what is the value of routine for a child? And to be honest, for all of us, but routines can really help organize and help children feel organized and families feel organized on the outside. And that organization can then become internal and a more organized internal structure. And it helps kids to know, to feel safe and to know that the world is predictable, that it's safe, that there are things that we know are going to happen and people we know who are going to be there. So I like to think of structure as a mix of kind of rituals and rhythms throughout the day that kind of can become integrated into our core sense of self and help us feel safe. And especially during times like right now, we're going through a collective trauma. There's a lot of societal stress going on right now. And so when things feel chaotic on the outside, then the organization and routines within our own homes can become especially grounding and especially important because it kind of helps us to feel a sense of control when there may not be as much outside. So that's some of the value, but we also value spontaneity and freedom and creativity. So on the other hand, I don't want us to, we're not talking about rigid adherence to a routine, like check, this is what we do all the time, even though sometimes that might be good for some people. We want the balance of routine, rhythms, rituals, with some time for play and creativity and spontaneity. So we don't want over control, but we also don't want chaos and a free-for-all, because in a sense, it's like the other side of the same coin. And both become problematic at the extremes. And then you also asked about data. So a lot of our interventions, and especially for kids with certain kinds of mental health conditions, a lot of it goes back to the basics. And a lot of the literature recommends interventions geared towards helping put some structure and some limits and some predictability into a child's daily routine. For instance, children with trauma, children with trauma, children with autism, a lot of children can really benefit, and for different reasons, and we could go into that if we wanted to, but for different reasons can really benefit from having the structure and routines built into their days and consistently across households when there's multiple households. And that structure alone can result in less behavioral acting out, less symptoms in a sense. And then on the other hand, some of our literature talks about how extreme adherence to structure can be problematic for some of our kiddos who are more prone to severe anxiety and perfectionism and obsessive compulsive like traits, because we want to help them kind of, sit back and relax and kind of work on the rigidity. And so, yeah, there's a lot of talk about that in our literature, and a lot of it goes back to some of this basic structure.
Excellent. Yeah. And so you mentioned that there are two extremes. Can you paint a little bit what those could look like? So the over-structured and then under-structured.
Yeah, sure. So overstructured, I think might, and maybe I can just use some examples, some hypothetical examples, but overstructured. So this is maybe a family who, and thriving on structure is not a bad thing. So I don't want to say that this is bad across the board, but when I hear about some, sometimes whenever there's a kiddo who's on such a strict routine that then when something comes up, like it's New Year's Eve and there's fireworks on the balcony, but we can't go outside because it's not time for that. It's time to brush teeth and go to bed. And so then, these kiddos are missing out on some of the play and fun and spontaneity and creativity and that kind of can impair bonding, I think. So that might be an overly structured kind of an example. When rules trump experience and when rules trump relationships, then I think that's when we're going to extreme that way. It's okay every once in a while to have a sugary treat. It's okay every once in a while to stay up past bedtime. And those kinds of things are good for all of us. It's like that old adage, moderation is good, even moderation. Mm-hmm. And then the extreme of kind of the opposite, when there's lack of structure, I think what I'm seeing a lot right now is really this sleep schedule gets very disrupted. Kiddos who are staying up almost all night or really late into the night, even young kids consistently. Wow. Playing games. Technology is a big one. Staying up all night playing games, and then they're very tired during the day and getting online school. And so that's kind of the other extreme. And one of the red flags, I think, whenever I get concerned that a family might need to work a little bit, or caregivers or the grown-ups in the household might need to work a little bit on implementing a little bit more structure, is whenever I hear things like, well, yeah, I would love to do that, but my kids just don't want to, or, I can't get my kids just don't do that. They just don't sleep at night at all. And, barring an extreme mental health crisis where we do see a lack of sleep, most kids really do want and crave and need structure. So whenever I hear those things, they're a little bit of a red flag for me, because I start to think like, wow, some of this kid might not have that very important role of authority in their life. And I mean that in a very loving way, because kids do need authority and they do need to feel contained by structure.
Now, that's a very interesting, and we'll come back to that and how to implement structure if you don't have enough. But what's interesting, it sounds like what you're seeing is a lot more lack of structure and need for more structure in these times, and then the other way around, which is interesting, right?
Yeah, I do think that's a fair a fair generalization. And I think a lot of that is the external structure kind of got stripped from under us. We lost a lot of systems that naturally gave us structure. A lot of people are stressed to the max and are juggling multiple roles. And so, of course, this impacts them. And I get that. I totally get it.
Yeah. Well, now, if I'm a parent and I'm like still wondering, am I too strong, too structured, or not structured enough? But it could be some of the signs that I'm too structured or that I'm not structured enough. Because you can have anxiety in both cases, right? I mean, the kid will be anxious in some.
Yeah. I mean, both can have negative outcomes, also, I mean, as parents, it's so hard. Like I feel for parents. I'm a parent. I work with parents. I love parents. Sometimes we're given a bad rep, like we're all trying our best right now.
Absolutely.
So I think that one, if you are a parent and you're wondering those things and you're reflecting on those things, you're so ahead of the curve because it means that you're engaged in this reflective practice of and assessing kind of how things are going and what
Hmm.
maybe you could do better. And that's really the first step. And another thing is knowing your kid. Truly, some kids. I think there are some basic parameters that might be generally good across the board. Like, kids need a certain amount of sleep, healthy foods at certain times of the day. Those things are kind of general, and those could be anchors for structure. But within that, I think families have their own values and their own culture and their own ways of parenting, and so it's not a one size fits all schedule for a family. And so I think as a parent, just reflecting not only on what you're doing and what's working and the kid you have in front of you and what their needs are, but also even reflecting on what life was like for you when you were growing up. Did you have too much structure? Was there too much chaos? What would you have needed? I think starting to build that reflective practice can really inform where there might be needs for adjustment.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. That actually can bring a lot of meaning, and passing on good habits and good routines from previous generations can be
Mhm.
so fruitful, I think. And then kind of sorting out like, okay, our dad was just too strict sometimes, and or whatever it is, but having a kind of an awareness, a self-awareness, because sometimes we're not. So that's excellent,
Yeah.
excellent, and suggestion. Now, I want to come to COVID a little bit, but before that, you mentioned a few kind of, can you help us a little more about what are some good habits, good routine habits that can be instilled at a very young age and maybe for later ages? So kind of an age level habits that are important.
Yeah, sure. And I know it's funny because I know some people like to joke about how science has proven what common sense tells us.
Yes.
So I think this might come into play now. Like, I think if
Good.
anybody in the audience or anyone watching this were to kind of guess and honestly kind of try to take a stab at this question, that they would probably say what I'm about to say. But the first early years. So when we're talking about development, that 0 to 2 period, those really early infancy years, it's not so much about structure and schedules. It's more, I mean, some of that can be nice, and working towards getting some rhythms into the day is really important for the sanity of the parents. But really, those first years are really about attunement and understanding and nurturing and bonding with the child. And so it's not a whole lot besides, maybe, in those early years, working towards like every night, maybe giving a warm bath at a certain time to help soothe into this transition of now it's bedtime, the little things like that. But really, those first years are just about kind of, just being there and nurturing. And one of the good things, no screen time for those early years is a good recommendation that can help later on. And then when we're talking about those preschool years, so I think some of the good stuff that we can start is, helping kids to play outside, having time each day to play outside, having good sleep habits, working towards sleeping in their own bed, unless there's a family culture where that's not what's intentionally practiced. And it's okay if it's not. It's just the intentionality. I want there to be the parents are making a choice about the way that their family is. So helping with bedtime, with hygiene, some of those little smaller things can be introduced, and helping toddlers and even young preschool kiddos feel a sense of kind of agency around that can be important. So, you can ask a 5-year-old and include them in on this. So, like, you can ask a 5-year-old, so how much screen time do you think is good for your brain today? And I think what you'll find is most kids are pretty wise, and they're not going to say, oh, I want to be on the screen for 6 hours. They want to do what's good for them. And so, and helping them understand, these are healthy foods. So what do you want to pick? So those are some good habits at that age. Getting into elementary and then on into high school. I think so. Elementary and middle school, there should be probably some more. I think some nightly rituals around bedtime, giving in the electronics, helping them to manage and organize work. Um, perhaps complete homework before doing a fun thing in the afternoon, getting outside enough. And then on to high school. I mean, so the key developmental task in high school is related to socializing and developing one's own identity. Um, so I think trying to put some structure into that is good. You know, helping your kid find a social outlet that is healthy for them, that is also structured, and it's not just, go here, stay as long as you want. You got it. Helping them to feel success and scaffolding that. So I think those are some of the key things at different ages, but increasingly involving them in the process, I think, is critical.
Right, and kind of being more of a coach and holding them accountable. You committed to this, and helping them stick with those commitments so that they grow in self responsibility.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I think parents can do, it's funny, is model it. Like kids see what we do,
Yeah.
more than they hear what we say. And so if I'm a mom who, is pretty lax, there's a pretty strong likelihood my kids are going to be pretty, or if I'm a mom who, really value, I take showers every night, then my kids are going to look at that and see that as normative. And so they're going to do that. So, some of it is practice what we preach.
Absolutely. Now let's, with COVID, more children are now working from home. Many parents are called to implement new routines to help structure their day. And sometimes the parents are working from home as well. Do you have some suggestions for these parents on what routines and structure seem to work to adjust to this change?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it depends on the age for one. And I also think it depends on the individual kiddo. There are some high school students and older students who are doing pretty well with self-monitoring and managing their workload. And there are some that are needing more prompting, coaching, reminders to log on, troubleshooting around technology issues, and some of that. The younger kids, I think, the parents of younger kids who are also trying to work are really struggling. And naturally, it's really hard to multitask. We are not designed to do that. And so our productivity, if we're working from home and helping our kid or kids attend classes, is going to be lower. And so practicing some self-compassion is really important. Taking breaks from our work. So, setting up a place where we work, and then setting up a place where our kids work, that's separate from the bedroom, that's, if possible, separate from the room where they play video games, or the room, where they want to play soccer. So kind of having a space for work and the spaces for play. Taking breaks in between classes or in between work meetings and checking in on each other. Getting outdoors, getting some fresh air between classes if possible. Limiting the games or technology, like the fun screen time in between classes, and postponing that until work is done. Can serve as a motivating reward for some kiddos. But, those are some of the things that I can think of.
I think that's great. I mean, it's interesting. So in the fall, I did see a little more than I do now, but we would see those families all going out together after the work day, right? For a walk or
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's nice because now with COVID, if everybody's at home, now the parent has a responsibility of kind of overseeing that the child is attending to this work, and then, and having a structured life. So basically the structure, the child's structure, our life structure is moved from being in the school to home, and you have to manage that. And so being proactive, like, having some of those activities that you mentioned, as the calendar, let's all have lunch together, and hey, great time, family meals again. So there are some of I think it could be a silver lining in some way.
Absolutely. That's the exact word. Yeah, that's the exact word that came to my mind when you were saying that. There can be a silver lining in all of this.
Yeah. It's not easy, and it can be stressful, but if it's there a way to kind of bring that in a positive light as, okay, so how do we, this is our new world, right? And
Right.
so how do we manage this? Now, so that leads to the next question. So how, okay, yeah, how does a parent establish a new routine? What's your suggestion in the process maybe that parents can adopt to do that?
Okay, well, I think one is, what we sort of referenced this earlier, but to start is just to reflect and just to kind of pause and examine kind of what's going on, what's working. Are there areas for growth? Are there areas that we need to kind of practice more compassion and just permit ourselves to be a little bit less put together during really stressful times? There are some families who are having to, do co-ops with other people because they can't, or have a bunch of kids in one place trying to do school so they can go to work. And there are a lot of people that don't really honestly have the privilege of being able to be there for their kids, and or who can't afford to, pay someone else. So, I do want to also honor that, it's different for every family. But I think one of the key things, if you wanted to make changes, is first to reflect on what you want to change and why, and where is this coming from in your own history, and what do you imagine will come out of some of these changes. And then second is to start small. I mean, it's January. January is like the age of resolutions and the time that we all make changes. And you know what we know from the literature is big changes it's too much. We can't make humongous lifestyle changes. Most of us can't and be consistent with them. So start small. Keep one promise to yourself or to your family every day. It might look like every morning, we're going to wake up and go for a walk before we get on virtual school or virtual work. Or we're going to sit on the porch and kind of, just check in and set an intention for the day. Or if you're spiritual, like engage in a prayer, some small thing to start each day with or end each day with, and keep that promise to yourself and your family for a while. So you've built in this little ritual, and then it can grow, with reflection and with, with awareness of what else could change.
Nice, and of course involve maybe the children in the communication about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think collaboration is always key because it's just like we like to be, we need buy-in before we make changes. If your medical doctor asks you, like, well, what do you think you need to change about your diet? You're probably more likely to generate and be motivated to make changes than if they say, okay, Gerard, you need to eat only meat. You're like, okay, doc. There's this natural defensiveness. We don't like to be told what to do. And kids are the same. So invite them in and help hold each other accountable. It's cute when kids can come in and say, like, hey, Mom, remember we're going to go on a walk. Invite them to do that and give them permission to do that.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I want to remind our audience to can ask any questions at any time in the chat box, and we have a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. My next question is, how does it work with when you have when you have to work with a reticent child, maybe because he has a fragility, mental illness, with ADHD, depression, anxiety, or other conditions that make it more difficult for a child to change, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I think one thing is when we talk about reticence, or even kind of when I hear the word resistance, I often think about like, well, what barriers are getting in the way for that kid? And you mentioned like ADHD or some other mental health concern. And what we really believe here at Clarity, and we say over and over, is kids do well when they can. So when they're not, and when they're not making changes that are good for them, because kids do inherently want to do well and want to crave structure and crave success. And, they want to do those things. So when it's not happening, or when there's a pushback, then something's getting in the way. So then it's our job as parents. And if we can't figure it out as parents or caregivers, then it's our job, as professionals, to figure out what that is getting in the way. And so kids with mental health difficulties often have an increased need for this structure and an increased need for, containment. And so I think it's especially important for them, especially important. And I think we need to expect the pushback. Just like all of us, when we make changes, it might not be like a really loud over kind of pushback, but we're going to feel it internally. Like, oh man, I don't want to go for a run. I want to lay in my bed. And kids who have mental health, different presenting concerns are more likely to react in different ways and tell us in different ways. And so expect that and understand that, and then be consistent. And so consistency is really key. And over time, that will become something that is helpful to them and something that they can internalize.
Yeah, so it's not always easy. So I'm thinking, being a father, I know a little bit about, this issue. And a child with ADHD is going to be drawn to use that video game all day or be on the computer extensively, right? And so it has to be really taken out and move to something else that to and limit the time, right? So that's a pretty common example, I imagine, that a lot of parents have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. So a kiddo with ADHD might need a lot more prompting and a lot more reminders. And the more we can do that in a really compassionate kind of empowering way,
right?
Good. It's better. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in some kiddos with trauma, I hear a lot from foster moms about how hard it is to get some kids that they've taken in with the really, really wonderful intentions. And then they're blown away by some of the behavioral outbursts, and it's to be expected. And so, with structure, with warmth, with nurturance, and with time, these things are going to go down. There's not going to be a quick fix.
Yeah. Well, that'll be my last question. Is sometimes when you try, especially with teenagers, but maybe even younger kids, right? So you have a power game kind of coming in place, and so how do you still assert authority, right? Because you're the parent, and you have to help the child learn, and you have a responsibility to keep them away from not sleeping or just being on the computer all day, right? So how do you do that without the child feeling like, oh, you're just controlling me?
Yeah. That's that is a hard dynamic to get into. And so I would encourage families, we got to drop the rope. This it's not about power struggles. We're not playing tug of war. And so I think really openly communicating to your child or to your teenager, hey kiddo, I love you so much. And my job as your parent is to keep you safe and to help your brain make good choices and to put some limits here. And so one of those things, and one of our rules in this household, is that we don't do screens after 10 o'clock on school nights or whatever. And so that's the limit. And I get how frustrating that is. And I understand that some of your friends don't have that rule. And I feel you. And it's still the rule. So both hold the feeling and hold the line, because we don't want to just drop it when they get mad enough, because then we're teaching teenagers, get mad enough and you can do whatever you want. It's not what you need for them. But we also don't want to hold the line so firmly that we are, ripping or, whatever, getting very angry and frustrated and using shame or harsh and punitive tones with our teenagers.
That's great. Great closing word. Thank you so much, Dr. Lawson, for this very good advice and information. We're looking forward to our next webinar next week, which will be with Dr. Jeff Gentry, and we will be talking about. Now that's escaping me, but we will have a very fruitful webinar next week. So I look forward to having you all again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.